Paris, March 1944. A German administrative building near the Arc de Triomphe. A Wehrmacht colonel reaches for the brass handle of his office door, the same door he's opened 100 times before. His fingers wrap around the cold metal. He turns it. Click. In that instant, a concealed firing cap strikes a percussion cap hidden inside the hollow handle mechanism. The explosion is small, barely louder than a hand clap, but devastating at point-blank range. The blast tears through the colonel's hand, sending shrapnel into his chest and face. He collapses, bleeding out on the polished marble floor, while subordinates scramble in confusion. There's no visible bomb, no wire, no timer, just an ordinary door handle that became a weapon the moment someone tried to open it. The Gestapo investigation goes nowhere. They find explosive residue inside the shattered handle, but how did it get there? Who planted it? The building has armed guards at every entrance. Security sweeps happen daily. Yet somehow, resistance fighters turned a mundane piece of hardware, something touched dozens of times daily, into a deadly booby trap that killed a senior officer in his own headquarters. The psychological impact ripples through German occupation forces. If door handles could explode, what else might be weaponized? Chairs? Light switches? Telephones? The Germans had secured the perimeter, but forgotten the interior. And Station 9 had just taught them that in occupied Europe, nothing was safe, not even the doors. By 1943, the Special Operations Executive faced a tactical evolution. Early sabotage focused on obvious targets, bridges, railways, fuel depots. But as German security tightened around critical infrastructure, the SOE needed to strike where the enemy felt safest, inside their own buildings. How do you sabotage a facility when you can't get explosives through the front door? You don't. You weaponize what's already inside. Station 9's engineers realized that occupied buildings were full of potential weapons, everyday objects that Germans touched routinely without suspicion. Door handles were perfect. Every office, every headquarters, every barracks had them. People grabbed them reflexively without thought, dozens of times daily. A saboteur with brief access could convert a standard handle into a deadly trap that would wait patiently until the right target opened the wrong door. But how do you hide a bomb inside something as small and ordinary as a door handle? And how do you ensure it only detonates when activated, not during installation or from innocent cleaners? The challenge was engineering a booby-trapped handle that looked and felt completely normal until the moment of activation. It couldn't be heavier than a standard handle. Suspicion would be immediate. The explosive charge had to be small enough to fit inside a hollow brass mechanism, but powerful enough to kill or maim at contact range. The trigger needed to activate from the normal motion of turning a handle, requiring no special knowledge or unusual force. And critically, it had to be safe to install. Resistance fighters couldn't risk the device detonating prematurely during placement. Station 9's solution was mechanically brilliant and morally brutal. They created modified door handles that incorporated a miniature pressure release mechanism. When installed, the saboteur would engage a safety pin keeping the firing system locked. Once in place and the safety removed, the next person to turn the handle would release the firing pin, striking a percussion cap that detonated a small plastic explosive charge molded into the hollow interior. The blast directed outward through the handle's length toward whoever was gripping it. Death or severe injury was virtually guaranteed. This is the story of how Britain weaponized architecture itself, turning the buildings Germans occupied into landscapes of hidden death. The booby-trapped door handle's genius lay in its perfect mimicry. Station 9 obtained genuine German and French door handles from various manufacturers, the same hardware installed in thousands of buildings across occupied Europe. They selected models with hollow interiors, providing space for the explosive mechanism while maintaining authentic external appearance. The explosive charge was plastic explosive, highly stable, moldable, and powerful. Station 9's chemists calculated the optimal amount, approximately 1 to 2 ounces. This was enough to shatter bone and tear through flesh at contact range, but not so much that it would destroy the entire door or cause structural damage that might allow the victim to survive behind cover. The explosive was molded into a cylindrical shape fitting the handle's hollow interior, with a cavity for the firing mechanism. The trigger system was the engineering masterpiece. A spring-loaded firing pin was held under tension by a release catch connected to the handle's rotating shaft. When someone turned the handle normally, the rotation released the catch, allowing the spring to drive the firing pin into a percussion cap. The cap's detonation triggered the main explosive charge. The entire sequence, from handle turn to explosion, took approximately 1/10 of a second. The victim's hand would still be gripping the handle when it exploded. You won't believe the attention to detail Station 9 applied. The modified handles weighed within grams of authentic ones, achieved by carefully removing interior metal and replacing it with precisely measured explosive and mechanism components. The handles turned with the same resistance as genuine hardware. Too loose or too stiff would raise suspicion. Some versions incorporated small grooves inside the handle that directed blast force preferentially toward the palm and fingers, maximizing injury. The safety mechanism was critical for installation. A removable pin locked the firing pin in place, preventing accidental detonation. The saboteur would install the handle with the safety engaged, then remove the pin through a tiny hole that was nearly invisible once the handle was mounted. This allowed resistance fighters to transport and install the devices without risk, arming them only after secure installation. But engineering perfection meant nothing without operational deployment. How did these deadly handles actually reach their targets? Station 9 manufactured booby-trapped door handles in limited quantities, perhaps 200 to 300 throughout the war. Production was dangerous and time-consuming. Each handle required approximately 8 hours of skilled labor to hollow out, install the explosive and mechanism, and reassemble to perfect cosmetic appearance. The work was done in isolated workshops with extensive safety protocols. Distribution to resistance networks happened through standard SOE supply channels. The handles were packed individually in padded containers to prevent damage during parachute drops. Each came with detailed instructions written in invisible ink or codes explaining installation procedures, safety pin removal, and optimal target selection. The instructions emphasized patience. Install during opportunities when buildings are accessible but not immediately occupied, allowing time for proper placement without rushed work that might create suspicion. Resistance cells selected targets carefully. High-value installations, Gestapo headquarters, military administrative buildings, Wehrmacht officers' quarters received priority. The ideal scenario was replacing a handle in an office used by a specific high-ranking German officer. Resistance members working as cleaners, maintenance staff, or administrators in occupied buildings would identify opportunities when they could access offices during off hours. Installation required nerve and precision. The saboteur would remove the existing door handle using standard tools, install the booby-trapped replacement, ensure proper function and alignment, then remove the safety pin. The entire process took perhaps 5 to 10 minutes for a skilled operator.
The modified handle looked identical to what it replaced. Same finish, same manufacturer markings, same wear patterns if artificially aged. German security sweeps looking for bombs or hidden weapons would find nothing suspicious about a door handle that had apparently been there for years.
The psychological choice facing saboteurs was grim. Installing these devices meant potentially killing not just the intended target, but anyone who might use that door. Secretaries, janitors, subordinate officers, even children if the building had family quarters. Some resistance members refused to deploy booby-trapped handles for ethical reasons. Others argued that anyone working in German administrative buildings was supporting the occupation and therefore a legitimate target. The debate was never fully resolved, though operational use continued. Little did the Germans realize their own buildings were becoming battlefields where opening the wrong door could be as deadly as stepping on a landmine. The first confirmed booby-trapped handle casualty occurred in occupied France, early 1944. A Gestapo office in Lyon. The explosion killed a German intelligence officer and severely wounded his assistant, who was standing nearby. The investigation found explosive residue but struggled to understand how the bomb entered a secured building. Security logs showed no unauthorized access. Searches had found nothing. The handle itself had apparently been standard hardware until the moment it exploded. Similar incidents followed across occupied Europe. A Wehrmacht logistics officer in Brussels lost his hand and eye when his office door handle detonated. A Gestapo administrator in Amsterdam died from shrapnel wounds. A German civil administrator in Copenhagen survived but lost 3 fingers. Each incident created panic among occupation forces. If door handles could be bombs, how could they feel safe anywhere? The psychological impact exceeded the physical casualties. German personnel became paranoid about touching anything in buildings where resistance activity was suspected. Some officers ordered subordinates to open doors for them, a reversal of normal protocol that damaged morale and hierarchy. Others had every door handle in their facilities replaced simultaneously, a massive undertaking that consumed resources and still didn't guarantee safety because resistance members might simply booby-trap the new handles. Security procedures became absurd. Some German facilities implemented handle inspectors, personnel whose job was examining and testing door handles before senior officers used them. The inspectors would grip and turn handles while standing to the side, hoping to survive if the device detonated. This practice was as ineffective as it was demoralizing. Inspectors knew they were essentially human bomb detectors, and many refused the assignment. The Germans attempted to develop detection methods. They tried X-raying handles in high-security buildings, but the explosive and mechanisms were small enough and positioned in ways that made X-ray identification difficult. They experimented with magnetic detectors, but many components were non-ferrous. They even considered replacing all door handles with transparent glass or plastic versions where any modification would be visible, but this was impractical for the scale of occupied infrastructure. But the booby-trapped handles weren't perfect weapons. They had significant limitations that Station 9 and resistance networks had to address through continuous refinement. The primary limitation was indiscriminate targeting. Once installed and armed, the booby-trapped handle would detonate for whoever turned it: German officer, cleaning staff, civil administrator, or even resistance members who'd forgotten which doors were weaponized. This created ethical dilemmas and operational complications. Resistance networks developed protocols for marking or discreetly identifying trapped handles, but these systems were imperfect and sometimes led to resistance casualties. Installation opportunities were also limited. Accessing offices in secured German buildings required either incredible luck or substantial risk. Many resistance cells never found suitable opportunities for deployment despite receiving the devices. The handles sat unused in hidden caches because the risk of infiltrating German facilities to install them exceeded the potential benefit. The explosive charge, while deadly at contact range, was small enough that victims standing slightly away from the door might survive with injuries rather than death. German officers who habitually stood back and pushed doors open with their foot or used objects to turn handles could avoid the worst effects. Some survived the explosions with severe hand injuries but lived to identify the sabotage method, allowing Germans to implement countermeasures. Station 9 developed improvements based on operational feedback. Later versions incorporated dual detonation systems, a primary charge in the handle and a secondary charge in the doorframe that would explode simultaneously, creating a larger kill radius. They experimented with directional charges that would focus blast energy more precisely toward the user. Some variants included anti-tamper mechanisms that would detonate the device if someone tried to disassemble it, though these were rarely deployed due to increased risk to resistance fighters. The most significant evolution was psychological rather than technical. Station 9 realized that even unsuccessful deployments, handles that were discovered before detonation or that injured but didn't kill their targets, still achieved strategic value by creating pervasive fear among German personnel. The knowledge that everyday objects might be deadly was its own form of psychological warfare. The booby-trapped door handle never became a major weapon of World War II. It killed perhaps a dozen German personnel and wounded several dozen more, small numbers compared to conventional sabotage. But its impact far exceeded its body count. It demonstrated that occupied buildings weren't safe spaces, that German control was illusory, and that resistance could strike anywhere, anytime, using the infrastructure Germans themselves relied on. This sinister innovation influenced post-war thinking about asymmetric warfare and insurgency. The concept of weaponizing mundane objects in enemy-controlled spaces became a standard tactic in subsequent conflicts. Modern explosive ordnance disposal specialists trained to recognize booby-trapped everyday items because Station 9's World War II innovations established principles that remain relevant today. The booby-trapped door handle represents war's capacity to corrupt the ordinary and make the familiar deadly. It turned architecture into ammunition and routine into risk. For German occupation forces, it meant that every door, every handle, every simple act of entering a room carried the possibility of sudden violence. And for the resistance fighters who installed these weapons, it meant transforming buildings into battlefields where the Germans' own infrastructure could kill them. That's not just sabotage, that's psychological warfare that made enemies fear their own offices. For more deadly innovations from Britain's secret war, subscribe to World War II Weapons now.